Tell us about where you were born and where you grew up.
Okay, I was actually born in Heanor in Derbyshire, but at the age of 2 weeks, being brought from the nursing home, was brought up in a place called Eastwood in Nottinghamshire, which is famous for two things. The Midland Railway started there. The local colliery owners got together, and instead of sending their coal away to the south by canal, they decided it really was time to have a railway. This is way back in about 1836. And you can see in the Sun Inn, on the facade of the Sun Inn in Eastwood, the details of how the colliery owners met and decided they were going to have a railway. And the railway is still there. It's the main line from London to Sheffield. The other thing is, of course, that Eastwood is the birthplace of a very famous and once much maligned author called D.H. Lawrence, who was brought up in the town. He became a teacher in the town, and then he went to University College in Nottingham, and then went to work in Croydon in South London, and eventually, you know the story, they say he eloped with Frida Weekly, who was his French and German professor's wife, but in fact it was not quite that. So people say, oh, colliery, mines, dust, dirt, smuts, you know, the fine grain of coal dust everywhere. It was not a bit like that. It was an agricultural area, and the mines were hidden mainly in the undulating countryside.
As a child, did you have any role models or screen idols?
Yes. When I was about 10 or 11, another boy and I in the class, we were both avid cinema goers. Eastwood had two cinemas, the Empire and the Rex. The Empire was put up in 1912, the Rex in 1938. And we started to collect film stars' photographs. And he apparently had more money because he was an only child and his parents gave him more money. I was one of two, so my pocket money was limited, and we would write off, dear, you know, to Alan Ladd, dear Mr. Ladd, I have seen all your films, would you please send me a photograph? And one came back, and often a signed letter. I still got them, and an actress friend who does antiques says, well, you ought to sell them because you can make a lot of money out of them, but I don't know. So, yes, people like Cornel Wilde. Who is Cornel Wilde, you're going to say? And people like that. And they were, you know, they were role models at the time, but you're only 10 or 11, and so you change.
Apart from acting, what other jobs have you done, and what is the best and worst of these?
Well, when I left school, I became a clerk. But when you're acting, of course, there are some bad times. And once a friend said, oh, I can't do this job. It's a kind of toastmaster at a medieval banquet in Shropshire. Do you want to do it? You know, it was £50 cash in the hand, and the gas bill needed paying and all that sort of thing. So I said, okay, here's the script, he said, here's a tape of what you do. And I met the people for the first time in Hampstead, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon we drove to Shropshire, and they said, you do know what to do, don't you? Yes. Well, that was, I think, my worst job ever, because I was hopeless at it, and it's really something I'd like to eradicate from my memory. But I was glad of the £50, yes.
Can you remember the turning point in your life when you decided to become an actor?
Yes. The school was, well, Eastwood was doing a pageant. I don't know whether it was Eastwood's celebration for, I can't remember what it was, but it was doing a pageant on the local park, and our English master was directing certain sequences, and I was the herald in the pageant. And we were doing rehearsals one day, and he said, have you ever thought of being an actor? And from that moment, of course, you know, that was it. And so I went to a teacher in Nottingham, and then took auditions and got myself into RADA. Mm-hmm.
So RADA's where you did your training. Did you graduate with anyone who is now quite...
Oh, indeed, yes. This is where Albert Finney, Peter O'Toole. I remember I was in my first year, and all the people in the first year were kind of slaves when it came to evening performances, because they had to help with the backstage stuff and putting the furniture on. And Peter O'Toole was playing in a Shaw play, I remember. This was way back, isn't it now? And he was getting rather stroppy with the director, I remember. But what it was about, I simply cannot tell you because it's so long ago.
Tell us about your first television, radio and theatre.
Good heavens. First theatre was marvellous because I finished at RADA on the Saturday evening. We were doing The Caucasian Chalk Circle by Brecht, and I'd already written to the West of England Theatre Company, who were based in Exmouth in Devon, saying, do you want any spear carriers, or I'm finishing at RADA on Saturday the 29th of July or something. And they wrote back and said, come. So I went. I finished at RADA on the Saturday evening about 11. We said goodbye. The next morning at about 8:30 I was on a train from Waterloo going to Exmouth, and then on the Monday morning I met the people. We rehearsed the first play I was in, which was called Worm's Eye View, an appropriate enough title for somebody starting in the theatre, isn't it, by Delafield. And then at lunchtime we went home and had our lunch, and they said, come back at 2:30. I duly did, and got into this converted furniture van which had bus seats at the front, and behind all the furniture, props, costumes were stored, and off we went, I think, to Honiton in Devon, to the Corn Exchange there, where they were doing the current play. Took the furniture and the stage stuff out, hauled it up onto the stage of the Corn Exchange, put it up, lit it, dressed the set. Somebody gave me a hammer and a nail and said, put these two, what do you call them, flats together. Of course I had no idea at all, but it was a great start. And then I had the evening off because they were doing a play. But when it came to the opening of Worm's Eye View, we played that for a week in Exmouth, and then we were on the road. You would either do 2 nights. I remember it was very interesting because you were always given hospitality, and stayed in some weird houses, some very old houses, you know, going back to 1500 and all that sort of thing, and people would make you very welcome and give you a meal, and then they'd say, oh, you're in the such and such room. But sometimes they gave you such a hard mattress you never got any sleep, but there we are.
What about radio?
Oh, radio. My very first radio was for Children's Hour. You remember Children's Hour? It was actually, I think it was live, though I did a lot of live broadcasts when I first started. And I played some sort of senator or something. The memories of it were the cast, really. They were people who'd featured in British black and white films, you know, who are now older, and they all wore suits and came in with their copies of the Times and everything. And one had seen them in things like The Seventh Veil, or in Eric Portman films and things like that, you know, and it was quite interesting because you'd stared at them on the screen and there they were, you were working with them. It was a tale of those times, you know, of ancient Byzantine or something, but about anything else I can tell you about it doesn't exist in the memory, I'm afraid.
What about television?
Television was interesting because that was live again, but then you see one had trained to be a live actor on the stage, so doing it live didn't really hold any fears or terrors. This was an episode from the Civil War, Roundhead's Cavaliers, and I remember sitting at a desk and having a hat and doing all sorts of bows and things. It was very nice. And that went out again on rediffusion on their Children's Hour one Friday, live. And that was how it started, I guess.
Your first Doctor Who role was as Maniac in The Ark alongside William Hartnell. What memories have you got of The Ark?
Well, the rehearsal room, I told you earlier about rehearsal rooms, a boys' club, wooden floor, stage at one end, T-bar at the other. And it was in the road that lies directly parallel with the north side of Shepherd's Bush Green. And at the end of rehearsal every day, you would come out about 5:30, and I was using a motorbike at the time because it was cheaper, you know. And there would be a crowd of boys, young boys, sort of from 8 to about 12, and they were waiting for one person, William Hartnell, Doctor Who. Hey, Doctor Who, you know, talk to us, something like this. They would shout anything at him to get a reaction back. And he would say, hello, boys, you know, so how are you doing? And then get off in his car and that sort of thing. But that sticks in my memory because every day they were there waiting for him. The director, I think, was Michael Imeson, and I had worked with him before, I think, and so because I think I'd done Dr. Finlay, not a Doctor Who, a Dr. Finlay, and I think he'd remembered me from that.